want you to imagine the last place that you visited of historical importance to you. It doesn't have to be prehistoric, it can be any era of history that's important to you and the last place you visited. Now, I want you to imagine that you can't visit that place anymore, or it never existed, you never knew about it. How would that make you feel? Right now, it turns out that the entire landscape below this hill is littered with historically important places, but here's the thing, you can't get to any of them. Now, let me explain what I mean. You see that field system just down there, now roughly encompassing that square or triangle that I'm pointing to? Well, that contains nearly 20 scheduled monuments from various different eras: Bronze Age, Iron Age, Neolithic. And I can't access any of them, I can't learn about them, and no one's really caring for them at the moment. To find out a bit more about this subject, I'm just going to go and meet a man from Right to Roam who's going to tell me all about this problem.
I'm Lewis Winks and I campaign with Right to Roam. I live near Dartmoor in Devon.
So Lewis and his team have just embarked on this huge project, and that's how I learned and came to learn about that area that I was just talking about. Let me show you the map.
So I live near Dartmoor and I'm very used to going up there and seeing Bronze Age, Iron Age, burial mounds, settlements, and walking up on Dartmoor and really immersing myself in the history of that place. But with the Right to Roam campaign, we started thinking, well, how many of these ancient scheduled sites are actually accessible elsewhere across the country? You know, a lot of them exist within woodlands, on private estates, on field edges. So we started delving into the data held by Historic England as to how many of those sites really are accessible to the public.
So here is the map on screen now, and you'll see a whole bunch of purple shaded areas. They are scheduled monuments. So what exactly is a scheduled monument?
A place which is, it doesn't have to be particularly ancient. Sometimes scheduled monuments can be more recent in time, perhaps dating back to the wars, but a lot of them are ancient landscape places which were once places of human activity and settlement. DCMS, the Department for Culture, Media and Sport, say that scheduled sites connect people through place. Really, we're talking about places that should be accessible in large part to the public.
So everything you see on that map that is shaded purple, well, that's out of bounds to you and I. It's illegal to get there for sure.
Well, we have a right to roam in England across just 8% of the countryside, and that 8% we were lucky enough to get through the last round of changes to access brought about by the last Labour government in the year 2000, which gave access to mountain, moor, heath, downland and common land, and a lot of those areas are in our uplands. So a lot of that is in the north of England, down in the southwest, some of that's on Dartmoor and on Exmoor. If we're looking beyond those areas, then the only way that you can access land is through a public right of way or sometimes a permissive path, but largely walking across fields or into woodland, or even following your local river would not be allowed unless you're following a right of way. And you can contrast that to something like Scotland, where there's a presumption of access with sensible exceptions, so responsible access to the countryside, and underpinned by a code of conduct by the Scottish Outdoor Access Code.
So what exactly are the numbers at play here? What sort of percentage? How many are there in total against the ones that are purple that we can't get to?
But we took that data and then we cross-referenced it against public rights of way, against roads, and then we buffered that to 20 metres, so a distance of 20 metres from roads or public rights of way.
Okay, so what we're saying here, Lewis, is that this is quite an understatement. The work you've done, you are sort of underplaying those numbers to err on the side of caution.
And then we also removed any that were in access lands, the open access land across England, and then we removed National Trust and we removed nature reserves from that as well. And what we were left with was 5,500 sites which have no right of access to them, and that's 5,500 out of 20,000, so about 28% of our ancient scheduled monuments which we have no right of access to.
Okay, so on the map I'll zoom in now to the area that I was specifically pointing to at the start, and you'll see a vast number of these purple areas where I can't get to. But how exactly would I benefit from getting to those areas? What is the point?
So something that this data shows us is the arbitrary nature of the exclusion to most of these sites. The 5,500 sites that we have no access to, it's not for the benefit of the public, it's not for the benefit of the sites, it's just purely because of where our roads and our footpaths go, and it's purely because of where our access land is. The point we're trying to make with this is that actually the public can be agents for good in the countryside. We can be out there, we can be caring for these sites, we can be looking after them. After all, the scheduling of these monuments was done largely by the public, who noticed them in the landscape and then notified the authorities about their presence and said, we want these protected from the plough, protected from bulldozers.
Okay, so if we do open up those areas and we suddenly let people in, well, won't those areas get damaged or trashed or vandalised in some way?
Something that has been amazing through releasing this data and through the conversations that we've had, we've met so many people who are part of groups across the country who take care of sites and take care of sites in spite of a lack of access quite often, sometimes through kind of informal arrangements with landowners, sometimes because they go there with a lack of any kind of permission to go there, but we'll tend to and look after these sites, and we'll also notice them in the landscape and make sure that that any litter that's there gets picked up, and that if any damage is done, then they could report it. And so we've got this kind of subculture of stone tenders that exist in England, and there's a proud history of that. And we can see, if you go onto the Modern Antiquarian website or Megalithic Portal or the Stone Club, all of these clubs and societies, they have a rich membership of people and supporters who are out there to love and care for these sites. And so rather than pointing to, oh, well, what if the public were to damage these sites, actually what we see over and over again is the public caring for our history in the landscape and actually defending it quite often from damage.
Okay, let's play devil's advocate. I'm a farmer. Let's assume that I'm concerned right now about how opening up some of these sites is going to affect my ability to farm, to be able to provide the country with food. That's a huge responsibility. If all of a sudden I've got people walking all over my land, well, how does that affect me, the farmer?
So I think that really the idea of going into crops, if we were to follow a code of conduct like that in Scotland, we wouldn't be crossing a field of crops anyway. We wouldn't want to see that as part of a right to roam. We want to see a right to responsibly access. But also we could point to the fact that farmers, the onus then would be on the government to provide funding to farmers for infrastructure, to furnish access to fields that might be of interest to people, so that people could go there, see these ancient sites and come back using access infrastructure that's paid for.
Okay, so if this did go ahead and we were somehow able to achieve this, maybe for a right to responsible access, well, what does it exactly look like for everybody?
All of that said, not all of these sites are going to suddenly be overwhelmed with people, and I think already the most popular sites are visited. So English Heritage have a whole network of sites, for example. Some of them are paid to access, quite rightly, because they need a lot of upkeep. So we're not going to see people flocking across the landscape, but I'd like the right to be able to walk out my door and go and visit my nearest bowl barrow and take my lunch break out near the site of an old spring or an old well. Those kind of things I think people could start to do, and that's what we've done with our mapping, is we're kind of inviting people to go out into the local landscape, to connect to the past through these ancient sites.
Okay, so Lewis had popped up from Dartmoor. Not an easy trip, especially by train, so I wanted to show him some sort of really important sites around the area. Sites are important to people and the community for so many different reasons, so I thought we'd pop up to West Kennet, Long Barrow.
So we're here at West Kennet, Long Barrow, one of the best preserved long barrows in Britain, and it is very well visited. There's a permission to be here if the landowner gives permission. There's no right of way leading here, but we've come up here and we've just seen some people leaving, and it's obviously very well visited. You might even call it a honeypot site. But yet all around us in this landscape, from where I'm standing, I can see 2 or 3 other places where there are barrows, bowl barrows, long barrows in the landscape that have no right to be there. So it's quite strange standing here in a very well visited site, but yet knowing that we're standing in a landscape where the majority of other sites like this are excluded from public access.
Now, if you want to take a look at this map, I'd urge you to do so through the brilliant Stone Club website. Now, you'll also find on there a quote from Mariana Hota, who highlights that these figures from the right to roam are indeed likely an underestimate. Now, We do have permissive access to some of these, like the West Kennet Long Barrow we're at now, but with that comes issues in itself.
But we shouldn't be relying purely on permissive access to allow us to get to these places, because we know that permission can be revoked. We know that permission is not a replacement for rights, which would give people the ability to go out into the nearby countryside, see a place maybe not as intact as the West Kennet Long Barrow behind me, but somewhere where the past is present in the landscape, and to connect with that place in a meaningful way.
Okay, so we are factoring in some exclusions within this scope.
So if we think about the situation we've got currently in England, which is that we have a presumption of exclusion to the land, with some exceptions, and those exceptions are across 8% of England. But if we flipped that and thought, well, what would happen if we had a presumption of access with sensible exceptions, then we could start to think about the really sensitive sites, the places that are sensitive for their archaeology, for wildlife, for perhaps public safety, and then start to make those exceptions. At the moment, it's really hard to do that, and it's really hard to make a legitimate case to the public that's understandable, relatable, when you're saying, well, actually, most of the countryside you don't have a right to be in. At the moment, we've got this really arbitrary, bizarre situation where the majority of the landscape we can't go into, so people are kind of corralled into places like the West Kennet Long Barrow behind me.
Okay, I kind of like this now. I think Lewis has kind of convinced me that this is such a beneficial thing for us to do as part of a bigger picture. What exactly can you do to sort of, as an action point, how can you help with this cause?
We want people to be able to walk out of their door and feel they're welcome in the countryside, and feel they have a right to be there, and not just to stay on very narrow corridors or footpaths, or to be there by permission, but to be there by right. And so that would enable us to extend that right to not just ancient sites, but other landscape features. And so people can help the campaign and help achieve that by getting out and exploring, using the resources that we've created, writing to your MP, lobbying for that change to happen in Parliament, because the only way we're going to get that is through new primary legislation in Parliament. So we're pushing for that, but we need your help. We need you to get out and to explore your local area, write to your MP about why it's important to have the right to roam.
Lewis and the team really feel we need a good set of codes underpinned by an educational system which allows us to get back in touch with nature, to understand it and access it in a really responsible way, and that sort of underpins the Right to Roam campaign, the right to responsible access. So big thanks to Lewis for his time today and popping up from Dartmoor to Wiltshire. If you've liked this sort of video, well, we do have a playlist which you can probably access somewhere up here, and we don't make these videos that often, perhaps once every half year or so. They're kind of close to my heart because I do feel we can learn a lot from what the Right to Roam campaign are trying to do. Certainly helps me make the videos, and certainly helps me enjoy getting out and about and enjoying the landscape. Thanks for watching. We'll see you this time next week.